I'll tell you what some of the few that jumped out at me. Interestingly enough, a lot about the afterlife. So I'm glad we got to one of those, because there seem to be a lot of questions about the afterlife.
I didn't realize it was so religious here.
Yeah, there's a lot of religion.
Really surprised.
There's this one's interesting. Is it light versus dark, or are light and dark equal partners? So I think that we reflect that idea. But I think it's a compelling question, because of that idea of darkness is often associated with bad in our language and even in our spirituality. And there are some ways in which that is extremely subtly sort of sending a message, right? So devil's food cake is dark, and angel food cake is light, and we talk about entering the darkness as a kind of, a dark period and those types in our lives, and blackballing people, and there's all kinds of ways in which black and dark are used in our language as being negative, and so I think that is a subtle problem, and I do think that religiously also sending those messages about dark being bad. I understand it metaphorically, and I think poetically it works really well, but I also think we need to be careful that we don't sort of reinforce an idea that is, even subtly or through our language, that is sending a message to people that may give that idea that darkness is associated with something bad, because also darkness going into the soil, a seed goes into the soil and then is born out of the soil, and there's the moon and the richness of night and evening. There's a lot of good that comes out of those dark places, and certainly those dark places in our lives, we can be born from those places into the light in some really powerful ways. So I think darkness, I do think it's important for us religiously and spiritually to reclaim the idea of the positive aspects of the dark as well, for multiple reasons. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, or if you got something else.
I'm not going to touch that.
All right.
But you're good. You're really good. But I've got two here, actually. Mysticism for Unitarians. And mysticism, I know it is here. Interesting. Because I think that with the advent of new dimensions coming in, the church had this dialogue, this conversation going on about the Christian faith, which, if many of you know the story of how New Dimensions came here and what their journey prior to coming to All Souls, we were with Carlton Pearson, and we had embraced a universalist theology, liturgy, and it was changing as, of course, we were kicked out of mainstream, I guess, fundamentalism, and our pastor was named a heretic. But as I began to, once we got here, and I began to take what I was learning there and put it here, or to get education here within Unitarian Universalism, I found out that I had a very mystic, my evolution was becoming very mystical, in the sense that I was not so much as a Christian as I was a believer in God, but very mystic in this universal thing. So I believe it is here as well. And the conversation is still in the back rooms, but I think the presence is here. And if what is happening with the New Dimensions group is, I think that they're all evolving. The ones that are here, that have stayed, are evolving into another form of spirituality that is mysticism. So there is that flair here. In the second service, we think that it's Christian, but it's becoming more mystical in its approach to spirituality. So I think that before long, we're going to see a larger populace of the congregation embracing that. And based on your questions, I think there's more than I would have guessed before.
I'd like to say a word about that, about the mystical. So what I've seen is, and I talk about this quite a bit, about the ways in which people connect with what we call the spirit or the spirituality, or a sense of oneness with all life. It's talked about in many different ways. You don't have to be theological or theistic in order to feel that sense of oneness and completeness. Buddhism is that way. Buddhism, except for a few small offshoots of Buddhism in Japan. Buddhism is a non-theistic religion. Buddha never said he was a god or that there was a god. It's a philosophy of life. And so there's lots of, and yet it's very mystical. You can sit in meditation and find that sense of connectedness with all life and with all existence. And so what I recognize in mysticism in this church is that there are lots of people who have mystical experiences, and the difference between this church and a lot of other religions, and certainly fundamentalist Christianity, is that when people have what we would call a mystical experience or a high point experience or a peak experience, whether it's out on a mountaintop or through meditation or through singing or dancing or whatever it is, that we don't lay on top of that a dogma that says, you had that experience, that means that the Holy Spirit did this, and Jesus died because of this, and because of this, you need to do this, and women need to be in this place, and men in this place, and that's, all that dogma and doctrine that gets put on top of people's experiences is what happens in a lot of religions. But what I've recognized is that core experience of feeling connected in that way, sometimes euphoric, that those experiences are real. And what we do here is we give people the freedom to interpret that experience and make meaning out of that experience freely, instead of putting on top of it a set dogma and say, this is why, and this is what's happening, and this is what happened. This means this about the afterlife. This means, we don't say that. We let people explore, and we give as many resources through classes and discussion groups and branches groups, give people a chance to make meaning of their own experiences of life, the good, the bad, the difficult, the painful, and all of it, the celebratory. And so I think that that's really what's different about us than a lot of other religions, but certainly the mystical impulse is very much there. I saw one of our youth, I'll just end with this, I saw one of our youth, about my second year here, who was invited to a Bible camp from one of the kids in her high school, and went for a week over the summer and came back and told her parents, I'm going to become baptized as a Baptist. And she became very fundamentalist in her beliefs. And when her parents said, can you talk to her? They thought she needed to be deprogrammed or something. And as we were talking, what I realized was that she had that experience, what I would call a mystical experience. And you even hear people talking about sometimes through drugs and things, where they've had some kind of an experience that they're trying to make sense of or meaning from. And what I said to her was, what I recognized in her, she taught me something very important, because what she taught me was she had those experiences where she felt this sense of connection, and she felt something really significant in her life, and at the time she had not understood or was able to make meaning of that through her religious life in this church at that time. So when she went to this camp, and these other youth were saying, oh yeah, I know exactly, oh I feel that too, I've felt that, and I felt that in prayer, and this and that, this is why. And then they explained the Holy Spirit and the whole dogma of the fundamentalist Christian religion, and she said, oh, I had no idea, but it was the first time that somebody was able to put her experience, a mystical experience, which I believe is universal, but was able to put it in context for her, and she felt heard, and she felt seen, and she felt real, and her experience was validated. However, it was validated with an incredible doctrine that limited her life and limited her, in my opinion, limited her life and her viewpoints of what's real and what's true. So what I've realized in this church that we need to do is make sure that we do affirm, whether it's our youth or our adults, the experience, but then make sure that we give people a broad freedom to understand that. And I would say that in the second service, through the praise music, a lot of people will have a kind of a communal sense of that connectedness through the singing that happens to folks that can get that through that type of singing. And what we do differently than a fundamentalist church that does that kind of singing is that we don't, when the singing's done, they don't sit down and hear a sermon that tells them that they're going to hell and all the rest of the dogma and doctrine. We then provide some context in a free environment for people to make sense of that experience, which for them is very real. So we might have time for... No, I don't think we do. I think we're going to have to wrap up. What do you got there?
That's a good one right there. I mean,
the lessons of this life, will they be of any value after we're dead? I don't think to us.
That's even better.
Someone wanted suggestions for the Powerball numbers. I would refer to the hymn numbers from today, probably. Someone asked, what about intelligent design, which is a sort of an idea of how evolution came, which is rooted in, starts with the creation story from Genesis and basically tries to shoehorn science into that dogma and doctrine. And everything I've read about, everything I've studied is that it's absolutely false science and not real. And I think we've got a lot from evolution that we can teach, and that's certainly what we teach. And if you want to hear more about that, my sermon from last week, Living the Dream, is all about the power of evolution and that story to really help the world and people come together across all religions and all races and all cultures. I think evolution itself is a powerful creation story that can enrich our world and even help bring peace.